Welcome back. In this lesson, we're gonna cover a couple of privileges, how to assign them, and revoke them. But first, for the practice and for this example, we're gonna create a user directly from SQL. And for this, I'm connected with my sys user, so I have a lot of power to make changes on my database. So as mentioned, be careful on executing following commands. Okay? So first, to create a user, we use the following syntax. It is the create user, the name of that user that we're gonna create, identified by, and the password we're gonna assign to it, right? So let's create our user. Now our user is created, and let's try to connect with that newly created user. For that, I'm gonna be using the SQL Plus, and the syntax to connect to a user is as following. It is connect, the name of the user. I'm using my pluggable database, so I'm gonna use also the add and the name of the database I'm using, followed by the slash and the password of that user, right? So remember, it is connect, username, slash, password. If we do not enter the password, just username, we're gonna be asked for the password later on, right? So let's connect. And this fails as we didn't grant a privilege to that user to create a session, so he cannot connect to our database. So let's grant that user that privilege. The syntax for that is grant the name of the privilege, which is the create session, to, and the name of the user, right? So let's grant that user that privilege. Our grant has been successful, and let's try to connect once more. So the same syntax, and when I try to connect, this is gonna be successful. We can also alter that user to change his password. And the syntax for that is alter user, the name of the user, identified by, and the new password that he's gonna have, right? So let's try this out. Our user has been altered, and if I try to reconnect with that user with the old password, this is gonna fail, of course. So let's try it out. As we can see, we got the invalid username password, and we have denied log on, right? If I try to connect with the changed password, this is gonna work just fine. Now, our newly created user does not have a lot of privileges granted to it, right? So if I try to create a table, so let's just create a table with our new user, let's name it just sample, and I'm gonna add only one column to it with the ID name, right? This again fails as the user does not have a privilege to create a table. So we have to grant create table to our newly created user. So back to our sys user, and to grant creation of tables to a user, we use the following syntax. So again, grant the name of the privilege to and the username, right? Let's execute this. The grant has been successful, and let's try again to create that table from our newly created user. So when we try to create that table, so this is now successful. And if I try to select anything from that table, so let's select all from sample table, this works just fine. So we didn't have to grant a privilege to select some data from our newly created table, as that user has created that table and he has automatically privileges on that object, okay? But if I try to insert some data to that table, so insert into our sample table, values, and let's just add one row with the value of 1. This is gonna fail, as that user does not have any table space assigned to it. So he cannot use any parts of a drive where the database lies. Although that user has a privilege of insertion of the data on that object, as that object is the one he created. But we have to grant some table space to that user. And we do that as following. So the syntax is grant the name of the privilege to and the username. Now, we are using the unlimited table space. This is something that you would not encounter on production databases, but this would be handled presumably by your DBA, and some exact table space would be assigned to a particular user. But for the purposes of our example, unlimited table space is just fine. So let's grant that privilege. It is successful. And again, let's try to insert one row to our table, right? And this time, this worked just fine. Same as we can grant privileges to user, we can also revoke them. And the syntax for that is much similar to the grant and is as following. It is revoke, the name of the privilege, and then from, the keyword to, changed to from, and of course, followed by the username. For the example, I'm going to revoke the create session from our newly created user, and this should stop that user to be able to connect to the database, right? So let's revoke that privilege. Revoke has been successful, and let's try to reconnect with our user. So back to our SQL Plus, and let's try to reconnect. So the same syntax, connect, username, password, and this has now failed as the user does not have that privilege anymore, okay? And lastly, we can also drop a user. An important thing is once a user is dropped, also all of the objects that he owns are also dropped. But we have to allow for those objects to be dropped. To drop a user that does not own any objects is as following. It is just drop user badger. However, this is gonna fail as we already created an object with that user, so our sample table, and the drop user command is gonna fail as we have to use the cascade keyword to allow the database engine to delete also the objects that user owns, right? So if you try to just drop that user, this is gonna fail. So I add the cascade, and if I execute this command, my user is gonna be dropped, and also that table, so the object that he owns, is also gonna be deleted. Be sure to practice this out, but again, be very careful, especially if using the sys user. This is it for this one, and see you in the next one.